I had a really interesting experience on New Year's Eve, which made me reflect and made me realize that it actually wasn't the first time that I had that experience. So we were at a New Year's Eve gathering just at a friend's house with some people who I'd never met before. And, as I'm getting to know one of the attendees, I asked him what he did for work. And then the conversation came around to me and he asked me what I did for work. And I said what I always say, which is I run a sales training, sales consulting business. And as soon as I said that, the conversation didn't go any further. The topic changed. Now, the next day I reflected on that and I thought, you know what, that happens all the time. Whenever I tell someone that I run a sales training, sales consulting business, the conversation doesn't tend to go any further. The receiver of that information doesn't get curious and say, oh, tell me more about that. What does that involve? Or what sort of clients do you work with? Or do you run programs? Or are you creating new content? Rarely do people lean into curiosity. And that must be because when they hear sales training, sales consulting, they have this preconceived idea, I guess, around what it is that we do. And so, I found that really interesting, and it leads me to this concept of curiosity. Now, curiosity is everywhere at the moment. You see it a lot in leadership. You see it a lot when working with teams. We talk about it in sales training, and it just made me think, how many people are naturally curious, or is it a skill that can be learned? And interestingly, in one of our programs, Selling Fundamentals, we spend a bit of time on this concept of having genuine customer-focused curiosity. We believe it's a fundamental skill that successful salespeople need to have. And it can be learned because it's a skill. If you can see other people be curious, you can see that it's behavioral, and you can see that there's a skill to it, which means it can be taught, it can be learned. But how many people, are genuinely curious when they meet you for the first time or when they're having an interaction with a customer? Because curiosity drives inquiry, and inquiry typically involves good questions, hopefully good questions or great questions. And if you have genuine curiosity, it is typically fueling your passion, and that will lead to better performance. And so this concept of curiosity is a really interesting one. And I think, not just for sales professionals, but for all of us, could we just get better at being curious? In those everyday interactions that we have when we're meeting people for the first time, how do we really pay attention? And when we hear something, how do we kind of lean into the, tell me more about that, and actually genuinely care? I don't want to assume that when people don't have a follow-up question for me that they don't care. I think that would be a horrible place and space for me to kind of play in. I just think sometimes people assume that they know. But I just, it's an interesting reflection about how I think we can all be more curious. We don't want to sound like we're interrogating someone. It needs to be natural, it needs to be authentic. But we work in the space of working with sales professionals, and having genuine customer-focused curiosity is absolutely a fundamental skill that we think all sales professionals really need to work on and continue to get better at, because I'm not sure there's a limit to how curious we can be. There's an appropriate limit in the moment of time, but I think the moral to the story is let's all try and be a little bit more curious.